What's going on, y'all? So I touched down on some really big concepts in the last episode, and I felt like I just kind of brushed over it. So I wanted to give people a little more context because this can be confusing and when you're first coming up at it. So we just went over some numbers and the symbolism behind that. And so let me just touch on symbolism again real quick. So symbolism is a universal language. It's how we interpret everything because well, let me give you an example. Like right now you're watching me, right? And so you're looking at my outline, or and it's kind of like a thumbnail of who I am because you know nothing about like my background. There's all kinds of history and experience that I have that's not being relayed to you in this, and yet here I stand, and you can, although you don't know that about me, um, you can engage with the symbol of me and start to learn more about that stuff. And so that's really how everything is, because no matter what we're looking at, we can zoom in on it and kind of like learn more about that. And it's like, well, as we've learned through microscopes and everything else, is like there's a whole nother universe in there, and you can just go on forever and ever. And well, it's the same kind of concept when we're talking about like how we're breaking down the book of Revelation. Is like I can literally take one word and just expound on that indefinitely, and you go, no way, that's not. So let me give you an example. So last time we talked about John and who the author of the Revelation was, and we can just kind of set that speculation aside so that we can really concentrate on, well, they used John. Who cares who wrote it? Like for the time being, let's just see what they're trying to, the message they're trying to give us across in this book. Well, they used the word John. So John is a name that means Yahweh is gracious. Okay, and so just in that name, we already have Yahweh. Well, is gracious. Like, so we're going to talk about God. Well, yeah, you could literally talk about that for until the whenever. It's non-ending, right? Because it's there's always more detail. so but how did they come up with this name, right? So when they're talking about, remember we're talking about an illustrative book that's used deeply steeped in symbolism, and so it's like, well, they first get off on the story and they're talking about, John is on the Isle of Patmos for the testimony of Jesus Christ, and and so, well, this is much like the Christian experience because it's a personal thing. It's like nobody knows what it's like to be specifically you. Like we have common emotions and experiences, but like my and I can relay that with you, but you won't know exactly what it's like to be in my shoes. It's kind of like I'm on my own island, as it were, right? And so you see, that's how they're trying to like get into this. So even in the first, you're just opening the book and it's like, boom, whoa, whoa, what's going on here? So that's why I'm trying to break it down. So John means Yahweh is gracious, and Yahweh is derived from four letters, YHWH, which is the Hebrew term for the tetragrammaton. And so, well, what is that? We look at like Greek culture and stuff like this, and we think, what a bunch of moo or what a bunch of dum dums, because they like, what did they think in like, Mercury and Zeus with lightning and like, you know, all those silly people, it's like, well, that'd be equivalent to like if people in the future looked at us and was like, damn, these people really believed in Marvel character comic books, and thought that they were gods, and made movies about it. I think that's the most expensive movie we've ever made. Um, and so, by the way, those things are badass. I love it, and it's all tied into this deep mythology. But you can't understand the symbolism until we unpack it, like what we're doing. So, anyways, we don't worship Marvel comic book characters, but they embody certain characteristics. And so, what the ancients understood is like, well, some of these principles are hard to get at and they're very complex. And so, what you can do is personify them and like say, okay, this is kind of like, well, let's say this person had a character set and different limitations, and that's kind of how it works. And then you can take several different personifications and put them together to tell a story of like how reality works and processes it. So that's what's really going on here. So we got to look past the surface of things. So when they're talking about the tetragrammaton, it's another way of describing the ineffable, right? As best we can. And so it's like, the way I understand it is like the mathematical, geometrical version of God behind the veil, right? Like kind of, yeah. Anyways, so because really what's happening is that God is manifesting Himself through four primary laws through man, and that's what they're referring to in just I John. So if you're not understanding the culture, you've already lost two words in. So, but that's no reason for us to like shy away from these things. We should just try to find teachers that are better at kind of boiling this down in a way that we can consume it a little bit better. And everybody has a little bit of truth. Nobody's got this all figured out. Anyway, so Yahweh also is a transliteration of JHVH, which you may have heard of, which is, a way that people say this word is Yahweh, right? And then here is Jehovah, and so this is the Latin version of the Hebrew, so it's talking about the same thing, so, and that's the tetragrammaton, right? So I wanted to just kind of boil down what they're getting at there. What does that mean? And so, well, you can look at how they use just the first seven numbers. We were kind of talking about how numbers aren't as easy to define as we might think off the top. Because we say something's one, but in reality it's not separate from anything else. And so, like in Platonic theory, there was just unity, that was one, and then there wasn't the conceivable number until three, really, because two. I think they even spit when anybody said the number two. They would spit because there's no such thing as real division, and they thought that was like something that could lead us down a faulty path of reasoning, right? So anyways, to kind of break this down, right, I think this is a good analogy, and I'll try to keep it short and concise, okay? But so 1 through 7, right? We've got 1, which can be synonymous with unity or potential or data, right? And that would be synonymous with the mind, right? And so you could say 2 is synonymous with constraints or a hypothesis, right? In conjunction with data. If 1 is data, then 2 would be the algorithm, and then if 1 is mind, 2 would be thought, divine thought of mind, so these are constraints that we put on, and through that we get number 3, and number 3 is an emergence. It's how priority comes about, or order, because we had potential, full potential, and then you had to put constraints on it. And as soon as you put on which is a question, what is a question but constraints on information? So we constrain it down, and then bam, all of a sudden an answer appears out once we have a question. And so that is number 3, also known as information, because you had data, and then you had to put an algorithm on it. Well, data doesn't mean anything until you put a query on it, and then all of a sudden, bam, you have an answer, which is reason or information, which was known as the Word, and that's why Jesus Christ was the word in the flesh, you know. So let's, I don't, not to get in, we are getting to what that means now, you know, and so hold that concept in your mind as we go through this. Now, so 1, 2, 3, you've got unity, then you've got constraints, priority is 3 or order. So I like this side. It's kind of like data, algorithm, information. That's 1, 2, 3. And then 4 would be like, well, what comes after information is like actions. It's manifested in the world, right? So like that is your conclusion of the information, right? And as far as order, that's direction. And really what that synonymous is with body or material. So we've got mind, thought, reason, and now it's taking form in body, right? So there's reason incarnate, right? And so so, and that's why they're saying 4 primary laws, right? So you've got 1, 2, 3, which is the Trinity of God, but then you add 4, and bam, it's embodied in man, right? So you have God in man, 1 through 4, or the 4 primary laws. Now, this continues on to 7, and you can take 4 from that in a different way, in the sense that, so once you have body, what happens then? Well, number 5 happens, and what 5 is energy arises. It's emotion. That's how we understand our energy, and that's where we get our motivation from, and that's what we're talking about, the heart, right? And so, well, then we have to decipher what our emotions are telling us, and that's through number 6, which is the mental. So then we measure that, and so this is like, so now we're moving into the mind of man, right? As opposed to the mind of God. Now it's coming back again, but it's happening on an individual micro scale, right? So it's like, so you've got body, heart, and then 6 would be like mental boundaries that we constraints again, and then once again we have 7, which is really, through all of these things, there's a whole new emergence pattern, because 6, when you combine all 6 together, it creates a 7. And so that's the wholeness or the balance or the synthesis of all this. And so that's really like, so then you can take basically 4 through 7, which is 4, right? 4, 5, 6, and 7. And you could say, well, that's body, heart, mind, and spirit, which is 7. And so that is, well, we had God and man, and now we have man and God on that side. So it's the same kind of paradox when we're talking about Jesus Christ. You know, we see the infinite in the finite, and then we see the finite in the infinite, right? So you can look at it from each perspective depending on which 4 you pick from, but together it's the full 7. Now, so I already talked about what 7 is, and so 7 is the synthesis of all this, right? Or balance. Of God and man, or man and God. It's the same thing. So you can go like God and man, and then like you can do man and God, right? Because it's a relationship. It goes both ways. Jacob's ladder. It's like us as humans function as a portal with 7 specific types of portals that energy flows through us, and this is what it's referring to. You can look at these 7 in different ways, but I'm trying to give you a very basic understanding to build from.